Supposedly I'm live. That one viewer is me. Come on. Check, check, check. Yeah. All right, friends. If you're watching this, let me know. I'm trying something new for the channel here. So I'm gonna be doing a live stream today until I either get bored or my camera dies because I haven't purchased a power cable for my camera yet. I'm just using battery, but that can go a few hours, so it might be all right. What we're gonna be doing today is we have a local church that wants to do some changes to their broadcast setup. We may or may not be setting up Studio One for them. So just for funsies, I'm tampering with my broadcast template for Studio One and played around with it for a few hours last night. I'm going to open it up today and take some stems that they sent me and drop them in and just kind of see what we can do. And we'll see what happens. This is all kind of happening. Hey, Paul. We'll see what happens here. This could be a complete disaster. So just for funsies, here is what I was working on last night. This is my current Studio One broadcast setup. This is using the full version of Studio One. If you've watched my video on that, the main reason I do that is because of this little guy right here, the Listen Bus. Listen Bus is really cool for being able to monitor what's happening without affecting the live stream necessarily. That's not going to have any effect on what we're doing today, but it's really cool when you're actually doing a broadcast. So here's what we have, just so I can kind of talk through it and eat up some valuable airtime. Feel free to skip through all this if you watch this later on. So the cool thing about Studio One is you have this thing called scenes. And so right now we're in scene 1, which is all collapsed. And I can hit Command 1 and it will take me to that. And within here you can see we've got everything available right away. So from left to right, we've got our media, and then I can either go to my media scene, which is Command 2, or I can, within the all collapsed or anything else I have open, I can click on this little folder icon, and we can see we have a computer track, and within that we have computer left and right. The reason why I did that was because if someone through Dante or whatever it is they're programming with, if they don't happen to have computer starting on an odd number, then it doesn't matter. If you set your input, like on, instead of it being 1 and 2 or 3 and 4, like most systems will let you do when it comes to stereo channels, I could go in here and say input 2 and input 3, and then that's kind of happening in the background. It's feeding into this computer channel, and so all my processing, if I have any processing, will be on the folder, so that's not a problem. So we have computer and aux. This is a template, so you may not need both of them, but they're there to begin with. Then we got speech. I've got 2 handheld mics, MC, Master of Ceremonies, and then we've got 2 headset microphones. Each of these channels has some a studio rack applied. I love Wave Studio Rack. Excuse me. And but everything's off so that I'm not loading down my session until I actually need something. But like if I were to have this live, I'd turn on the channel and then turn on the items as I need in here. So I've got a VU meter, and this is going to be important because one of the things that we'll be doing today is if their channels are sending me, because the gain's being set at front of house, if something is not hitting around negative 18 the way we want, I think this is set to where around 0 is negative 18. So we might be adjusting the input gain up or down depending on how much gain we're getting in our recordings to try and get to that 0 mark more or less. And I think that'll be a good gauge. All these plugins today, by the way, I'm not endorsed by Waves, though I would love to be. But all these plugins, with the exception of 3 Waves plugins and a couple of free plugins, are all part of the Waves Horizon bundle. So this meter in here, the C4, which we might talk about, is a great way, actually using it kind of like a multi-band gate, which is pretty cool. The F6, we'll be using that kind of like a multi-band gate a couple of times, but we'll be using this as our main EQ. And then I've got just the standard old de-esser and the Puig Child. I believe all these are in the Horizon bundle. I'm hitting letter V just to quickly close my plugins because this is kind of a version of Logic's stuff. So, hey Judah, which one you prefer, Logic or Studio One for broadcast mix? So in the studio, I use Logic primarily, just because I'm used to it. I've been using it for over a decade. I think I like Studio One better for broadcast. Because of this listen bus thing that I mentioned earlier on the show. And then also just the way, like this whole scenes thing that I'll talk about, or I can get around very, very quickly. And as much as I love Logic, and this might have to do with an older version of Waves I'm running because I have a session that I need to finish before I can upgrade some of my software and OS on my computer. But Waves was causing my Logic session to crash more often than I would like. So since switching to Studio One for broadcast, I haven't had that issue. So I'm really, really happy with Studio One for broadcast. The other thing that I really like about it is just kind of the way you can get around with the scenes and everything. There's something else I was going to say, and it's completely lost it in my mind. But yeah, I like Studio One a lot right now for broadcasts. And I'm still tinkering with it in the studio. I'm still a Logic guy because I can just get around quicker if people are paying me for a session. But we'll see. Good question. Okay, so we got media, we've got speech, we've got our room mics, which I know there are room mics in this recording. We got the band. We're gonna come back and talk about this in a moment here. We got vocals, and each vocal is already pre-routed to a V verb S and a V delay S. What that means is send. So if it ends with an S, it's a send. If it ends with an R, it's a return. And this is kind of neat. So if my session is collapsed, or if I'm just looking at vocals, I always have access to my vocal verb send and I should point with my mouse, and my vocal delay send. So if you notice, there's no processing on these channels, and they're set to unity. So what's happening is they are outputting directly to the V verb R and V delay R, the return channels, which if you're actually in there, those actually have the Studio Rack plugin with the Waves reverb or delay. And the cool thing about that is I can treat it the way I do on an actual front of house console, where I like to be able to ride up and down my delays and my verbs. And it just sounds a little more natural because if I if I ride up my verb and then pull it back, it won't immediately choke the reverb sound like it would if it were if I were pulling back on the return, because I'm pulling back on the send and not the return, it will finish out its trail and sound more natural, especially on your delays if you're running long delays. So that's really cool on that. Okay, then we've got our drums, bass, guitars, acoustics, keys, and tracks. In drums, we've got our overheads have 2 channels, just like we were talking about earlier. We've got a snare reverb using the very cool, very free Tau Reverb 3. We've got a drum verb on everything else. In the bass channel, we are going to be double patching, or in this case, we'll double patch the actual wave file. And so we'll have 2 instances of Studio Rack and BOD, another free plugin. This guy is a SansAmp modeler that sounds really good. In guitars, we've got... Hello. So we've got currently 2 electric guitars, hard pan left and right. They both have the ability to have reverb on them, and they are both also routed to the G-dub. Excuse me. The G-dub, I've mentioned in some older videos, is my double bus, and what that means is that using the Studio Rack plugin, kind of tricky thing I'm doing here is I've set up a parallel split, and I have the left and the right channel, so you can specify what channel you want to work with. The left channel is panned hard right, the right channel is panned hard left, so effectively I'm just switching my left and right. And then those go to a delay, which is currently set to 25 milliseconds, which is one of those magic numbers. And then we're just rolling off some of the very highs. And what that ends up doing is creating a false sense of stereo. So if I have guitar 1, as you can see here, is panned hard left, the doubled version of it, which is slightly delayed, will appear on the opposite side and be a little bit rolled off. And that just kind of helps it to work in there. Judah has a question. I'm having some compensation issues in Logic. Great question. So one of the things that I'm doing, because we're using recorded audio today, you're not going to really hear what this is doing. But you'll notice on some of my plugins, for example, let's look at drums. My drum channels, because of the way I like to process drums, have the most latency. So, for example, the kick drum has the DBX 160. So I mentioned the Horizon bundle, which is currently on sale for, I think it was $275, which is the cheapest I've ever seen it. They used to charge $3,000, which is ridiculous. And I guess a lot of people stole it. So they realized it was smarter just to sell it or to rent it. And so it comes with a ton of plugins that are all very practical. So things like the VU meter, some of the CLA compressors, de-essers, 3 different types of limiters. It's a very, very good bundle, especially for a practical broadcast mix. But the 3 things it doesn't have that I have on here as well, one of them is the DBX 160, which I just really, really like for drums, especially for my drum subgroup. I like to parallel process with it, and I feel like I just get good results. Usually you can buy that for between $30 and $50. The Real Tune is also $30 to $50, and then the Waves F6. Which is incredibly practical plugin, is again between $30 and $50. So you can, for under $500, you can get the Horizon bundle, those 3 plugins, a few other, there's 3 plugins, a few other free plugins that I'm talking about in this show today as well. And so for under $500, not including Studio One, of course, you can get just a ridiculously good plugin bundle that will be very practical for your needs. Now, the reason why I say all that is part of the reason why I use Studio Rack is it will tell you if you go to this open slot down here, it will tell you how much plugin latency your entire rack has, and if you open it on a specific plugin, how much plugin latency that one plugin has. Most of the plugins I'm going to use today actually register as 0 samples of latency, but you can see in this particular one, because of that DBX 160, I have 85 samples of latency. You'll also notice, if I can zoom in on it here, okay, it's kind of hidden because you don't really need to see it all the time, but you can take notes in Studio One, and you'll notice it says kick drum sample latency is 85 samples. And what I've done is every single one of my drums has the same plugins. Even if I don't use them, they might be bypassed, but they have them all on there. So all my drums effectively come out to 85 samples of latency. And you can see my drum group, I made a note of saying 85 samples of latency plus 149 samples of latency because of plugin processing I have in my drum group. And then other things like my, I think my bass, for example, I'm using this free plugin from Voxengo called Sound Delay. And you can type in, so in this case, this first one, I want to do 85 samples of latency to match up with what the kick drum's going through, because there's some sidechain compression that's going to be happening. So I can literally just type in 85, and it will create an 85 sample delay. And all these are off right now because, again, the audio that we're going to be listening to today is pre-recorded, and so the software is going to be doing this in the background. But I've gone through and very meticulously found out, through looking at those readouts, how much latency is happening and lining things up. And basically, if I was to use this live, then I'd go down here to where it says performance. If you click on this, it'll give you your CPU and disk readouts, but it also shows you all of your plugins. You can sort them by name, and I can go down here to sound delay and highlight all the ones that say sound delay or sound delay 2, because a few of them, for sidechain reasons, have 2 of them in there. And I can just click on this button right here to activate them or deactivate them. And so for what we're doing today, we want them deactivated because we're working with pre-recorded audio. But when we're using it live and Studio One is no longer doing that for us because it's not really made for this purpose, then we can turn them on, and that will fix our issues live. You can do the same thing in Logic, however, you can't do this performance monitor thing. But if you were to put the sound delay plugin as your first plugin as best as you can across all your tracks, you could, highlight all your tracks and disable or bypass or unbypass all those plugins at once, and it would effectively do the same thing. So that's one way that you could do that. Isaac asked, is this a template you were going to put out for download or just tutoring purposes? Right now, this is just for tutoring purposes. This is you could. I'm going to give enough information that you could probably do this yourself if you're paying attention. But no, this is probably too good to give out for free at this time. We'll see. Let's see. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong. Mukbang channel, Mukbang. Hi, Chad. How are you? One question. Can I route the XR18 via USB for live streaming on OBS and spit it out with another computer for mixing with Studio One? Using a splitter USB. Not that I'm aware of. Now, you might be able to... well, first off, what you're hearing right now is all going through an XR18. So I'm routing what my computer's doing through the XR18 plus this microphone, and that allows me to hear what I'm hearing and so on and so forth. So XR18, very cool mixer. To get it to another computer, you might, I haven't done this yet, but you might, if you don't want to use like a external interface, like if you want to keep it digital the whole way, you might look at some of the Dante Via stuff. That might allow you to through a network cable transfer from one computer to another. Otherwise, you probably have to get either an output from the XR18 or another interface to get that there. I'm not really sure. We'll talk about that on another video, but good question. I like that. And the XR18, again, very cool. Okay. Forgive me if I'm all over the place here. So let's close this back up for now. So we were talking about electric guitar and the double bus for that fake sense of stereo, which is nice. You can just kind of blend that into taste. Acoustic guitar has a reverb. Keys have a reverb. And then we've got our tracks. Sorry, my mom came over for ice cream right before this, and now I'm all burpy. Well, one thing I like about Logic better in regards to reverbs is that your folders or groups in Logic, track stacks, that's what they call them, it has characteristics of a folder, a bus, and a DCA. And what I mean by that is that if I had one band reverb and I was sending, say, acoustic guitar from within a track stack to that band reverb, and it's a post-fade, effect, just like you would normally do. If I turned down the track stack for the acoustic guitar, it would, in effect, also turn down the level going to the band reverb, and it would act like it would on a regular mixing board. Last I checked, that's not how it operates in Studio One. So if I were to turn down the acoustic guitar in that example and have a different band reverb, you would hear the dry signal go down, but the wet signal would remain. So unfortunately, because of that, anything that I think is going to need reverb, I have to make a reverb bus inside that pack, that folder in Studio One. It's not a huge deal. It's just not very efficient, but it is what it is. So that is a trade-off where currently Logic is better for broadcast than Studio One. But otherwise, I'd say Studio One kind of has the best thing. Okay, so currently we are looking at my broadcast template. What I'm going to do is save as. Yeah, save as. And then we'll save a version for the church. Bold City. Okay. And then I've got all their 32 channels in here. Very cool. Okay. So I'm going to just start dropping these in. I'm sorry, this is going to be kind of boring for a moment here. Okay, so we got drums, overheads. Now, one thing that I always do when I label my overheads is I label them by drummer's perspective, and I specify that. So instead of labeling them OHL like they have them here, I would call them OHDL for drummers left and drummers right. But we're going to see if that's correct on here or not. Now, notice they only have a snare top. I do encourage people to do top and bottom if you can. Oops. I think it's just easier to get a more defined sound because I usually gate the top pretty heavy and do a lot of reverb on that, and usually leave the bottom open for more of that sizzle. So we'll have to see what we can do on here. Okay. Still learning all these key commands. We'll leave this drummer's talk back for now. I don't know if we'll need that for anything. Okay, we got bass. We're going to option and copy this because, again, we're going to have a bass and a bass dirty. Okay. Okay, and then they've got keys left and right. And then it looks like they have a pad in mono. They're recording on an X32, so they have a pretty big band. So they only have 32 channels to work with. So if I go to my keys, so we got keys 1, left and right are hard panned, and then keys 2, like I mentioned, is in mono. So we're just going to put this guy right in the middle here, and then we're all good to go. Let's see. Accidentally hit everything. So how many of you guys now are using a DAW for broadcast? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. There is a pads left and right. Great. Okay, we've got 2 acoustics, which works out well because that's how many I've got in my template here. Okay, we've got 2 electric guitars. Again, that works out well. Apparently, Command Shift T is to remove track. Okay, then we got PC left and right. So we'll put that under media, computer. There it is. Let's see. They got crowd left and right. For me, Shift Z is my collapse all, which makes things a little bit quicker to close these things that I don't necessarily need. Okay. Command Shift T. Now their tracks, they're currently only running a left and right. The way I've got my tracks set up on here, I've got them labeled as T main, which is just like the main loop. It's basically anything that doesn't fall into these other categories like percussion, bass, guitar, and vocal. And then, of course, click, cue, and music director. I don't really listen to the music director. There's sometimes in broadcast scenarios, if there's a like a video switcher in the same room, it can be useful. But oops, come on, that's where I've done this before. But I do definitely like recording it. Sorry, getting all messed up here. There we go. In case they go back and do any of this stuff live later on. In the studio. So we'll go ahead and put MD in there. This drum talk back, same deal. Put that in that same group. Violin, I don't think they actually use the violin. Okay, and then they got 4 vocals. Tony was asking if Studio One has a plug-in latency compensation when tracks are armed for live broadcast. No, unless it's been added recently. However, there is a thing you can do in Studio One that aren't tracks, but they're what do they call them? Aux channels. And it's a little clunky because it's not made to be used in that way. But an aux channel is a it's made for like if you were in a MIDI environment, for example, and that didn't work. Talk and click at the same time, Chad. Talk and click. And let's say you were sending information out to like an external MIDI controller or MIDI device, and then sending things back. It's a little bit of a niche thing. However, I did talk to some people at Presonus, and they said you could use that, and that does do live plugin compensation, which is kind of cool. However, you cannot record a aux track. It's made for sending out and coming back. For these kinds of environments, I like to be able to record as well, because why not? It's a DAW. And it's a little bit clunky, like I said, trying to set up those aux channels. Like you can't, as far as I'm aware, you can't duplicate them the way you can a regular channel. Like you can't make like 32 of them at a time like you can a regular channel. So when you're first setting up an environment like this, it's not very efficient at all, unfortunately. So yeah, but that is an option. We toyed around with the idea of doing that at another church where they had the infrastructure available to actually have two. Oh, come on. Actually, have two computers set up if they wanted. We could have had one that was a broadcast computer and one that was a multitrack computer. They could play back through the broadcast computer if you wanted to. However, that again was just clunky, so we ended up not doing that. Okay, and then finally they have the PC here. I think this is actually if they were playing something for the band's in-ears, like a track. We're just gonna turn those down for right now. Okay. John Bonds, I see your text about you've been using a Reaper. For stereo bus processing. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's great. I've got a video on that's pretty interesting. I think. I mean, it's kind of a niche subject where someone was asking about an XR18 earlier. Well, you can use the XR18 as a stereo bus processor if you like. Let's say that you had like a Allen Heath console. Or an analog console, and you really like the sound of your analog console, but you want to have the ability to process that for the internet, with a limiter, which we're about to hop into in a second here, things that you can't necessarily do, on an analog console very easily. You could use this as a, 3-channel space processing unit. And that's been really cool. Just the idea you could do it, but not for everybody. Okay, so let's hop in. One thing I'm going to do right away is I'm going to, on my stream bus, I'm going to set up just a little bit of a limiter. I like using this L3. And I'm going to have it do, we're going to start off with 6 dB, maybe 7. Let's go 7. So it's just kind of making everything a little bit louder already. You're going to end up doing it in the end anyway. So I find it's a little bit better to start off that way, especially that way. Hopefully you guys can hear this without having my voice be super loud. Okay, so we're just going to do this until I get bored. Okay, let's start with some drums. Oop. And let's, as best as I can here, trying to find an area where the band's really kicking. There we go. So one thing I like to do is a lot of people just kind of skip past the overheads. One thing that I learned from one of my mentors early on, the Garth, was just to kind of like actually focus on your overheads and try and get the best sound you can out of them, and then start blending in your other components. So, you know, let's try and get rid of some of the harshness, and I know we're gonna undo some of these things as we go, but we're gonna kind of make the sound a little bit fuller and maybe a little bit wider, and let's just kind of see what we can do, and then we might come back to it later. So one thing I was talking about earlier, I apparently need to play around with this VU meter a little bit more. But one thing I like to do is look at this meter on here and just trying to get my input levels hitting around this middle light, which is, I think, where it turns yellow, which is around -18, -12. And again, that helps me be consistent where, you know, depending on what kind of levels the church might be giving me on Sunday, if we try and implement this, it'll help me to be consistent with that kind of thing. Now, I should have done that first, so that's why when I started hitting that a lot harder, you heard a lot of compression on the DBX. So I had to go back and kind of undo that. Okay, so let's play around with the kick some. We'll blend that back in. And I'm hearing all these files for the first time with you guys, just so you know. So one of my favorite tricks to do to try and clean up the kick, so it sounds like this on its own. Let's see. There we go. You can hear it's not terrible, but there's some cymbal bleed happening in the background. This is going to be more important when we get to the snare and the toms. But one of the things that I really like to do is actually use an F6 as a multi-band gate. It's a pretty cool little trick here. So I've got this band 6 is a high shelf that is sucking out all the high end. And then what we can do is, as we lower down this threshold, is when it hits that threshold, it's undoing that that EQ. So, and then we're gonna do the same thing with number 1 here, which is being pulled all the way across and acting like a wideband. And the idea is that you can tighten up your. So if we just had a wideband compressor, you hear all that junk in the background. Wideband gate, excuse me, expander actually in this case. But on here I can specify how slow that release is or how fast. So we're doing around 10 to 30 milliseconds. And again, I really need to check my levels first. So let's got a little bit of boost. Okay, put the 160 on here. Just get it tapping. If you overdo it, it kind of chokes the life out of it. But if you put just a little bit in there with a little bit of boost, it can really make some things punchy. So I'm using the second F6 as an actual EQ. Just kind of scooping out some of the stuff that we don't really need or want on the inside. Okay, we'll start there. There's all that cymbal trash in there, and that just really, really adds up. Everybody doing okay on there? If you're trying to keep track of your comments, so if you have any questions, let me know. Tony asked, do you use a Surface controller with Studio One when you mix broadcast? I do. I just for the sake of space and time, I didn't set one up today. But I do like, and it works really well with Studio One, the Behringer X-Touch extender is the one that I use. It's 8 motorized faders and LCD screen, and yeah, I like that guy a lot. All right, so here's our 6-band. Now this sounds best when you have a bottom as well, because you can make this guy really tight for your biggest hits, and then kind of keep your quieter stuff, like your ghost notes, coming from your bottom, which I don't really gate hardly at all. So we might need to kind of play around with this a little bit in here. But the cool thing is this is an expander, not a gate. So you can see it's kind of fluctuating. It's not like a full-on you're there or you're not, which I find helpful. So before, after, here it is. I like to be able to mute the overheads, and like, it, for the most part, it does sound like they're muted. I can probably tighten up on the kick a little bit more. Let's throw some EQ on this snare. It kind of sounds like a phone book at the moment. Some of that's going to be some low mids. Let's see if we can get rid of some junk. Probably around there. I like a girthy snare, so kind of add in some of the lower stuff if we can without it getting too much back where we were. And then let's cut out stuff below it. This is that towel verb I was talking about. And you can kind of play around with the room size, how long it basically trails out versus how loud it is, and kind of get different tones out of it. You know, I don't know what I did with my tom mics. Somehow I lost those. So much trash. Ugh. Okay, so here's Tom 1. Lots of fun. Try to avoid those false triggers from the snare. Let's find some actual tom hits. You know, before I even get into this this gate, let's just try and EQ this to do it a little better. I like really bright toms because they cut through the mix, but then you end up with all this trash. And we'll just copy and paste this onto Tom 2 just to get a starting point. Not sure what mics are being used here. Again, I'm shooting for this middle LED here, so they've got a little bit more gain on the floor tom than they do on the rack tom. Let's throw in some drum verb. For this, I've just currently got just the R verb set up. Let's throw a little bit of EQ on there. We'll just throw an F6. Just filter off some of the highs and lows. Do the same thing with this towel. Put the studio rack in front of it. All right, and then let's just throw a little bit of parallel compression on the drums before we move on. I got the DBX 160. I got the DBX 160 set up on here, and I'm running it in parallel. So I've got the mix set at 50%. The output gain is at +6, so it's just giving us more volume to work with. And we're going to turn down this threshold to where we're getting it. I think around -10 is usually where I try and hit. And so it's creating a compressed sound, but it's blending it with the original. So let's play around with that. So without. With. Now don't let that trick you too much. Part of the reason why it sounds better is just because it's louder. But that is actually part of the goal, is I'm trying to make things louder so that I can have enough room to, part of the really great thing about doing a DAW mix is you can actually get, more slam and drums compared to a lot of times when you're working on just a mixer. So this is going to help us to kind of get a little bit more of that. Also, if we need it, when we kind of get everything else in there together and start running out of headroom, we've got this L1 limiter, which is currently not doing anything, but it is in there as just kind of a protectionary measure. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, so enough of that. How's everybody doing? I haven't looked at the chat in a while. Anybody got any questions so far or statements? You can make fun of me if you want. That's cool. I can always delete you. All right. Let's throw some bass in. I'm a bass player, so hopefully this isn't too embarrassing for me. So here's our bass. Like I said, I put the same channel on there twice. Now, when we're doing this live, one cool thing about Studio One compared to Logic and some other plugins or other DAWs is that you can set the same input to multiple channels. And what I mean by that is, let's say that the bass was plugged into input 9. If I went on here and said input 9, in Logic, if I were to go to the dirty bass channel and say input 9 as well, then it would only let me record arm one of those channels. Now I could input monitor both channels, but I wouldn't be able to actually record onto both, which makes sense because you're recording the same thing twice. But for the sake of what we're doing, live here, we could either record to both channels, or we could, record arm and input monitor, the first one, and just input monitor the second one. If you're concerned about that extra bit of space, it's up to you. But it's cool that you can do that. Whereas, like I said, in Logic, you can't do that. I don't remember if you can do that in Pro Tools or not. If anybody out there is watching and knows, please feel free to put that in the chat. All right. So for our bass, I guess let me extend out this area a little bit more here. Now, if I remember correctly, I'm not sure which bass player this is. They have a couple different guys. But I think he has either a Sans amp or some sort of modeler. Now, you can see they undergained him a little bit. Like I'd like to see him hitting closer to -18 to -12. So, again, we're going to take our input gain on here. Actually, I need to pay attention to what I'm doing. I clicked on the wrong channel. Yeah, he's got something that's gritty in there already. That's cool. That, or we're hitting our BOD already. So let's start with the BOD. Yeah, so that's what it sounds like on its own, which isn't bad. But I like slightly gritty bass. And my camera battery's going to die in a bit here, so I might switch that out in a second here. We're going to put a little bit of drive in. We can blend that back some if we need to. But it really helps it to show up in the mix when we add it to the drums. I think he's out here. Let's play with adding a little bit of compression. One thing I'll say, and I'm going to get real close to losing this camera in here. So one thing that I like to do is, you can see on this channel, all these plugins are zero latency plugins in Waves, but they still take up processing power. And one of the cool things about the Studio Rack plugin is, if you notice they're in italics, if I hit Control and click on one, it goes out of italics. So that means that it is now actually using up processing, whereas before it was not. So we're going to throw on this CLA 3A and just kind of control the bass a little bit before it hits that Sans amp to kind of control how much it's hitting that compression. And while we do that, let me switch out the battery on this camera. All right, all right. Ooh, little couple bad notes there, but you know who's counting. All right. I'm going to copy and paste those over to the Dirte channel, the Dirte. Let's see. Another thing, I think we can do this without using up any processing. Let's just type in pedal. Here's a pedal board. And I think there's a rat pedal. Yeah, and tuck it underneath. It helps when you're playing the right notes. We'll just have that really tucked in for right now, and then once we add in the other elements, if we need it, you know, to help sound better on small speakers, we've got it. And also just for fun, so we haven't looked at it in a while. That's what the overhead's muted, so you can hear we're doing decent with our gating here. The one thing I would like to do on this snare, if I can do it without getting too much junk in there, it's got a lot of snap to it, which is, you know, from our DBX 160, which is good. But also, if I can do it without overprocessing, let's throw a 76 on here as well. We're just going to put the attack and the release super high, so it's very quickly coming down on that, and just kind of chopping off some of those peaks. We could also throw in a limiter if we want to, but then I'd have to go and add that to all the other channels. So we're going to try this first. The cool thing about 76 is it when it's all the way up, it's a very, very fast. And so we're just trying to kind of shave off some of that peak in there. Another thing we could do if we need to would be to slow down how quickly the gate is coming in, which would effectively shave off some of that peak as well. That'd be another trick that could do something similar. Let's Let's just kind of leave that in the background. We'll come back to that in a bit. All right, so this guitar is panned hard left. And then just so you can kind of hear what's going on, here is what the double does. Doing something wrong. Let's see. So I got this going to the there we go. So if I put it at unity, so this is the guitar in mono. And then here's with the, I'll pan it hard left and put the double back in. That's without the delay, so it's effectively in mono again. And the delay just kind of throws out to the sides. Now I found the two magic numbers that tend to work really well for this are either 25 or 41. So 25 is going to give you like a safer bet because it's really short. Whereas 41 sounds better to me. However, it can get a little bit messy sometimes if there's a lot of fast picking. So I think let's go with 25. And again, we got some of the high end rolled off. And that just kind of helps your ear to localize it to one side. And we can turn that down a little bit more if we need to. So let's also hear, here's the reverb. Here's the other guitarist. These guitars sound great. I don't really need to touch an EQ at the moment. They're a little bit undergained, especially this one. I wonder if the person who was running sound for this, you see how weak this waveform is. So I wonder if the person who was gaining this was gaining to unity and not to a meter, which if you watch my videos, that's a big no-no, because you're making me have to digitally add gain, which is just not the same. It's not as good. So I'm having to add 16 dB of gain. So that means that this musician, or any of the musicians listening to him, that 16 dB of gain that they had to find somewhere or just live without. So don't do that, sound people. Give them all the gain that they need. Make sure you're not hitting the red. I mean, at 16 dB, I still have... a good bit of headroom to work with on here. So yeah, that's unnecessary. And this is completely live, so no judgments on any vocal stuff or missed notes we're getting here. So we just say that as we move on here. So let's move on to this next song here. It looks like vocals 2 and 3 are leading this. So again, we'll kind of play with the gain a little bit. They are very dynamic singers from what I remember. We'll throw a little bit of Waves real tune on here, just in chromatic mode. I usually like drop the correction down to about 75%, so it's not super obvious. Give a little bit of room in there. Once we kind of get vocal 2 in a decent spot, we'll copy and paste that onto the others.
My heart, this life is yours. Come fill me up, Holy Ghost. Shine brighter till the whole world knows your love. Your love. Come set me on a holy fire. Burn bright until the whole world finds your love. Your love. This is my one desire, and only this I seek, to be a living fire, consumed completely. This is my one desire, and only this I seek, to be a living fire, consumed completely. This is my one desire, and only this I seek, to be a living fire, consumed completely. This is my one desire, and only this I seek, to be a living fire, consumed completely. Come fill me up, Holy Ghost. Shine brighter till the whole world knows your love. Your love. Come set me on a holy fire. Burn bright until the whole world finds your love. Your love. This is my one desire, and only this I seek, to be a living fire, consumed completely. This is my one desire, and only this I seek, to be a living fire, consumed completely. Come fill me up, Holy Ghost. Shine brighter till the whole world knows your love. Your love. World finds your love. Your love. Consuming fire. You are my heart's desire. Oh, how I need you more. A fresh outpour with no resistance. I give permission. So come now, invade my heart. This life is yours. Come fill me up, Holy Ghost. Shine brighter till the whole world knows your love. Your love. Come set me on a holy fire. Burn bright until the whole world finds your love. Your love. This is my one desire, and only this I seek, to
Let's throw some room mics in there to kind of fill in the space. We got a really great crowd at this church. This will kind of yeah.
consume completely.
sometimes for room mics, what I'll do is they meet in a school, and so it's not. I mean, it's a good room sound, but what we'll do is we'll throw R verb with a low mix in here, so like 25.
This is my one desire, and only this I see, to be a living fire, consuming. This is my one desire.
And we'll have to check some of this when the pastor starts speaking because we don't want it to sound unnatural when he's on there as well. But let's throw a little bit of that in there. Let's oops. So if you notice, I put the reverb before the compression. We'll also throw in an S1 imager and just see if we can make this sound a little bit wider. Just a little bit, because we'll do some more of that on the master in a bit here as well.
Consuming fire, you are my heart's desire.
Listen how that fills in the toms and everything.
Oh, how I need you more, a fresh outpour with no resistance. I give permission, so come now invade my heart.
All right, let's see what the keys and acoustic are doing here. Let's go to keys. That's tasty. Again, undergained, unfortunately. Can't even see the waveforms. Come on, guys. Sounds great. Just throw a little compression on just in case. One of the first things I always do with the CLA 2A is drop the gain down to 35. Waves is sneaky, and they'll put it at 40 to begin with, so that as soon as you put it on, it's louder. And if you're not careful, you will think that it sounds better just because it's louder, and that's not how this works necessarily. Now, once I throw on some peak reduction, if I'm reducing a lot, like you saw, I did quite a bit of peak reduction on the vocals, then I might boost up to 40 or even as high as 50 if I have to, depending on how much peak reduction I'm doing. But I usually try and start it at 35 so it's not tricking my ear. I can actually hear what the compression is doing, and then I'll add back some gain if I feel like I need to. Isaac asks, what is the best system recommendation to run this DAW and all these plugins effectively? That's a great question. One of the reasons why I like Studio One, and I haven't actually done this yet, but I use all Apple products currently. However, I wanted for churches, as much as I love Logic, I don't want churches to have to purchase Logic, because then you have to purchase a Mac, which is very expensive. Now, I've run Studio One on, I'm running it on a 2019 MacBook Pro, I think it's 2018, somewhere in there. That's maxed out at 16 gigs of RAM, and it's a, this is a recording. We're hearing it through a solid state drive, and that's working really well for me right now. If you notice, my performance meter is about half right now, and I've got it at low dropout protection, and I put the buffer rate at 1024. So there will be some latency if you're doing this live, but I've seen this work really well on Mac Minis. I don't know if the new Mac Minis, if you can still do this, but up until the M1 chip, when you bought a Mac Mini, it was one of the only Apple products that you could still upgrade the RAM and the hard drive yourself. I'd be interested to know if you can still do it with the M1. I haven't researched that yet, so I don't know. But you can also, I'm not a PC guy, but if you know someone who can build PCs and, put a ton of RAM in it, if you get at least 16 gigs of RAM, I know with the Mac Mini you can do 32 or 64, I think, gigs of RAM on a Mac Mini, which is crazy. But I'd say the minimum would be 16. Great question on that. So this is literally just a pad. It might even be a drone. So this was something about earlier. If you weren't here when I first did this band 6 on the snare's first F6 is being used to act as a gate that is, an expander from 1K up. And so this is trying to get rid of all the cymbal bleed, but allowing us some time controls just on that high shelf, which can do some cool things. And the snare is just too grating for me right now, and so we tried an 1176 earlier, and that didn't really do what I wanted. So instead, I slowed down. I had a pretty immediate attack of 0.5 milliseconds. and I have just turned this up to 3 milliseconds, and
This is my
it's basically when the snare hits, there's a 3-second ramp up that the shelf comes back, and so you're not getting that immediate, just sizzle that it can be good in certain circumstances, but on this snare, I feel like it's just too much. So let's see how that feels in the mix.
one desire, and only this I see, to be a living consumed completely. This is my one desire, and only this I see, to be a living consumed completely. This is my one desire, and only this I see, to be a living fire, consumed completely.
Let's see what we have in the tracks. I don't know if they're using tracks on this song or not, but let's find out. Nope, dead air.
Brighter till the whole world knows your love, your love. Come set me on a holy fire, burn bright until the whole world finds your love, your love. This is my one desire, and only this I see, to be a living fire, consumed completely. This is my one desire, and only this I see, to be a living.
All right, so one last thing, and I think we're going to probably finish up for today. So I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. When it comes to our routing, so I'm going to go to collapsed all, which is my everything page on here. So we have these 3 groups in the middle here: room, band, and vox, which is essentially our entire worship team. So if those 3 are down, everything's down. So usually, like, especially if I'm playing like a pre-roll video at the top of the service, I'd have media up, those 3 down, and then whenever we do in the first song, the 3 of those would ramp up together. When it comes to the band, I have drums and bass, and if you'll notice on the routing here, those are going straight to that band folder or bus, however we want to refer to that. The rest of the instruments, though, if you'll notice, they're routed to mids SC. This is one of my little sneaky tricks we're going to play with for a second here before we finish up. So within the band folder, it's just the band bus itself, and it's acting as a folder for mid sidechain because I don't need to see it all the time, so I'm just trying to keep things pretty in here. So anything that's a mid-range instrument, so electric guitar, acoustic guitar, keys, and tracks, are all being routed to the mids sidechain bus. That then joins with the drums and bass to go to the band bus. So what is mid sidechain? If you'll notice on here, and I might not have set it up yet. I thought I did. Huh, okay. Somehow I deleted it. No worries. Oh, here it is. Sneaky, Studio One. Okay, so I've got 2 different studio racks going on. The first one here is an F6, and it is side-chained to the snare top. So what's happening is if you have really thick, electric guitars especially, this is kind of like a trick that they use in like metal, but anything that's a congested mix. What's happening here, let's see if I can get to demonstrate. Is it's listening to the snare drum, and when the snare drum hits, let's see, what am I doing wrong here? There we go. Let's get to a point where there's a lot of snare. Definitely not there. No snare there. All right, so what's going to happen is these frequencies are going to duck down when the snare hits. And it's going to be very, very fast, and hopefully you won't really hear it, but it's going to make the snare sound like it's just a teensy bit louder. Because when you're working with a broadcast mix, you have limited amounts of headroom. So this is going to help us to kind of, rather than just making something louder, we're creating more space, but instantaneous as needed. So let's turn off the solo. So that's obvious. That's really obvious on purpose. So we're going to make the range a lot shorter. Let's make the range like, I don't know, 6 dB, something like that. Let's hear it with the drums. Very subtle, and definitely could take some tweaking. But that's what's happening here is that the snare is creating a little bit of room on there. Okay, so that is the first one. The second sidechain component. Here we go. Is the exact same thing. However, this sidechain is listening to the vocal bus. And so the idea is that when the vocals are going, this will create a slight mid-range hole for the vocals to sit in, especially in those more critical 2 to 4K areas that tend to be a fight, especially for female vocals. And if you do too much of it, it makes the vocal sound really harsh. So this will help to create some room so that the vocals don't feel like they have to fight for that area quite as much. So let's take a listen to that. Again, we'll hit solo. looks like it's actually singing.
And I know you are moving. I'm here and I know you will fill me. Open up the gates, let heaven on it. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Fire and wind, come and do it again. Open up the gates, let heaven on it. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Fire and wind, come and do it again. Open up the gates, let heaven on it. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Fire and wind, come and do it again. Open up the gates, let heaven on it. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Holy Spirit, come rest on us. You're all we want. You're all we want. Holy Spirit, come rest on us. You're all we want. You're all we want. Come down, Spirit, when you move, you make my heart. When you feel the room, you're here and I know you are moving. I'm here and I know you will feel me. Come down, Spirit, when you move, you make my heart. Holy Spirit, come rest on us. You're all we want. You're all we want. Holy Spirit, come rest on us. You're all we want. You're all we want. Down, Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, you're here and I know you are moving. I'm here and I know you will fill me. Come down, Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, you're here and I know you are moving. I'm here and I know you will fill me. Open up the gates, let heaven on it. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Fire and wind, come and do it again. Open up the gates, let heaven on it. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Fire and wind, come and do it again. Open up the gates, let heaven on it. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Fire and wind, come and do it again. Open up the gates, let heaven on it. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Holy Spirit.
Cool. All right. I think I've done enough on that for now. Let's see if we got any more questions before we finish out. Okay. John Bond says that the W1 is even better when it comes to processing now. It's really cool. Let's see. Am I all caught up on questions? I think I am. Cool. Thank you guys for watching. I have no idea how long we've gone, but this has been fun. If you have any questions or things that you would like me to do next time, please feel free to leave those in the comments. I think this is going to archive. I have no idea. I'm just doing this for the first time, at least on this channel. So thank you guys for watching. Please feel free to come back for more live streams and more tech videos. And love you guys. Thank you so much. All right. Bye.